plans, current focus areas are, and future plans, and so on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Shravan, for putting this together, and thanks to TIFR and ICTS for hosting such a lovely workshop. I thank you for also accommodating this slot. I guess you have to break the morning session to kind of reschedule things for this session. So thank you for that also. It's great to be part of this this gathering. What I thought we will do over the next few minutes is to give you a broad overview of what Microsoft Research, or MSR as we call ourselves, is all about.
I saw some Satish?
Yes?
Sorry, can you make your presentation full screen?
Sure, sorry, yeah. Yeah, so what we will do, I saw some familiar faces in the morning, and but I thought it would be useful for those who are not familiar with MSR to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. So I'll kind of quickly run through a couple of slides, and then we can take it from there, right? So we've been in India for about now 16 years. The lab is based in Bangalore. So if any of you are in the central Bangalore area, please feel to drop in. People are slowly now coming back to the physical office, so the place is becoming alive again. These are the broad themes of our work. We broadly span these 5 different areas in what we do at the lab. First, a group that works on really the theoretical aspects, and I think there are a lot of overlaps with the computer science folks in TIFR in the algorithms space, and I think there are some interesting collaborations that are already on in that space. We also do, of course, you cannot run a computer science lab without using the word ML and AI. So we have people who work on the applied side of things, both from the ML side as well as in the systems and networking side. We have a bunch of people who do what is called a system design, the plumbing required for these technologies, which includes programming languages and things like that. And the last bullet at the bottom is an interesting one. We also have a kind of a very focused initiative in the lab, which looks at interventions that technologies can make for broad societal impact, and we call that technology for empowerment. And we've had a strong legacy of projects that will hopefully speak to this kind of work that we do, which is quite unique even within the MSR universe at Microsoft. It's just that India being where it is and the lab situated here, there are interesting opportunities for our folks to look at these kind of problems which go beyond the realm of traditional computer science. The circle on the right side actually is probably more relevant to this forum. This is the broad kind of impact areas that MSR India measures ourselves on. Of course, the blue one is obvious for Industrial Research Lab. We have to look at what we give back to the company and justify our salaries, which we hopefully do usefully. But the other 2 ones are what I think will be interesting to this audience. We do engage with communities directly. So some of our projects which don't have a direct tie to Microsoft, those projects we actually get out to the target communities that these projects are for, and we actually engage as a lab with external communities and partners, which include, of course, institutions like TIFR and the other academic institutions here, but through them also with startups and other nonprofits in this space. And the green bullet is really what this I think is a unique aspect of MSR, in the sense that since inception we've had this strong legacy of what we call as advancing science. So most of the effort that goes on in the lab, the output is published openly in peer-reviewed forums like conferences and journals, and that's something that we will continue to do, which opens up possibilities for interdisciplinary collaborations like these. This is the broad approach we take to how we look at our research within the lab. The figure on the left, the axes basically represent the time horizon of our projects. So typically, as a research lab, we have projects spanning both short-term, deterministic kind of efforts, which are done in close collaboration with product groups. That's more the classic model of a research lab. But we also really have a lot of work going on where we look at open problems which are long-standing, which takes a lot of time and effort to really take a crack at, irrespective of whether we are able to do that or not. So I think that's what we think gives us our mojo in terms of being truly open in terms of how we look at research. And so it's, I think, a healthy combination of both fundamental research as well as the applied domains that we span, our research efforts across. What I think supports this kind of approach is our culture. We have a fairly bottoms-up culture in the lab. While we are, working with product groups internally, we think that's not the only model for us. We have a very strong academic DNA, if I may say so. So we do publish openly, as I said before. Many of our folks in the lab co-teach courses at academic institutions, and we have, as people in TIFR also know, collaborations with academic institutes. The idea is to basically take big bets and not look at things from an incremental nature. So from that perspective, the kind of problems that are being talked about in this forum and gathering are something that really are exciting for us, and we hope to look forward to continue working on those with a bunch of you. And I think underpinning all this is what we call as our people superpower. We really believe the talent within our lab is unique, and we will continue to basically encourage our staff to look at problems, interesting problems, and look at work which spans not just the classic CS realm, but also interdisciplinary domains and forums with collaborations enabled as part of these kind of initiatives. So with that, I will stop. I think we are running out of time also. So we are really excited about this. And again, thanks to TIFR and specifically Shravan for driving this whole endeavor. I think we are really excited about what can come out of this, and are looking really forward to what some very productive engagements and outcomes. And unfortunately, again, apologies for not being there in person. I would have loved to meet old friends and also get to know a whole lot of new people. But circumstances prevented me from being there today. But I look forward to being part of this whole effort, and wish the whole group the very best from an MSR perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Satish. Does anyone have any questions, or we? One question.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a great talk. If Shravan will permit, I'm going to ask this question, but you can shut me up, Shravan, which is, Shravan has come up with this very nice and exciting model for engagement with industry, which I think he has discussed with you. But I just thought, in terms of your feedback, would you have any comments on how we could set it up so it might be more attractive to you? Just any comments on this line? Is that okay, Shravan?
No, great question. I'll kind of overrule Shravan and answer the question before he kind of weighs in on it. But yeah, I think no question is every question is a great question. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I didn't get your name.
Sandeep Trivedi. Yeah, you can call me Sandeep.
Yeah, hi Sandeep. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, so I think it's a great start, but what we typically find from our experience, at least in doing similar things, although we've not done something of this scale before in the lab here, but from the collaboration that we've done both with institutes like TIFR and the other institutes that we work with, I think the big learning for us has been that while there is great momentum sometimes at the institution level, what really makes the difference between success and kind of things not going up to scale is really the connection between the people who work together on these collaborations. So I think alignment of research interests, alignment of the problems that excite sets of people who are working on these problems. I think that's the crux of that, and that's what we've tried to imbibe in our journey in MSR, where we really let our research staff get excited and interested in these problems. And I think once that's established, I think things really move very well from there. So from the list of problems that have been identified for this particular endeavor, I think they look very interesting. Already there seems to be interest from folks in the lab on some of these problems. So I think that will be a good start, and we will make sure we'll put in the necessary resources from our end and look at what's possible that we can make happen to get this into the right direction. Yeah, I don't know whether that answers your question at all, but I think I don't know whether there's a clear answer to this. Yeah.
Yeah, I had another question. Hi, Satish. Uma here.
Hi, Uma. Good to see you in the morning.
I'm sorry, I don't know about this, but have those areas of interest already been shared with MSR, or is that something which is?
I think there's a document that I think is probably early stages, but I think it also lists some of the things that I think were reflected also in the talks today. So there is, I don't know whether that's kind of cast in stone, or I'm sure not. And there is probably potential to add more issues there. But but we are happy to look at what makes sense as part of both this effort as well as really alignment for our interest in the lab. So for example, your tiger stuff is something that has always been of interest to us, and I think we will take that also forward as part of this.
Okay, thanks. Just checking on it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, if nothing else, I guess we switch to thanks again, Satish and Sriharsh. You want to?
Thank you.
Prayush, are you online at the moment?
Yes, I'm available.
Okay, so in 10 minutes, I'll call on you. Thank you.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Even on Zoom? Somebody? All right.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, I'm assuming that everybody can hear me. Okay, thank you, Sudeep. All right, so I'm going to talk about noise, mainly noise, and then transients and anomalies in radio astronomy. And most of my talk is going to be about radio astronomy, but I'll also briefly touch upon some aspects of machine learning in astronomy as well, including a couple of slides from my colleague. Right. So my research is on transients, and in particular, we study these things called fast radio bursts. So this is an animation of what fast radio bursts would look on the sky if your eyes were sensitive to radio. They're basically just flashes of light. They last somewhere between microseconds to milliseconds, and there are 1,000 of them every day in the entire sky. Okay, and surprisingly, we detected these only in the past 15 years or so. We did not know about their existence before that. And some of these can be incredibly bright. They can be as bright as cell phone signals, except that they're not coming from a tower 10 kilometers away. They're coming from halfway across the universe. Okay, and we have no idea what causes these. Some FRBs repeat. So there'll be flashes from the same location in the sky with some of the same characteristics. Some of them don't. There's a flash and it's gone, and we haven't seen it repeat pretty much ever, right? So within our observation, it hasn't repeated. So you might ask, why are these transients interesting? Well, for one, we don't know what they are, so we want to find out. There's a big bang. And the other thing is that they are, to be visible from cosmological distances, they have to be 1 trillion times brighter, more luminous than the pulsars which we know of. So there are these pulsars. This is sort of a neutron star which is rotating, and it has a lighthouse kind of effect. And every time the beam points towards us, we get a flash of light. We know about these for about 70 years. And we have some idea of how the emission works, right? But we know these only within our galactic neighborhood. We cannot detect pulsars farther than a few tens of kiloparsecs away. These things are coming from gigaparsecs away, right? And because they're traversing this entire universe, they are potential probes of matter, magnetic fields, and the structure in the universe. You can probe basically every electron and magnetic field that the radio wave passes through. And then they're also could be linked to other transients. We don't know what produces an FRB, but there are a lot of different models, most of them which involve neutron stars, but there are also quite a few things which involve exotic physics, axion nuggets and string cusps. I think Sandeep would know more about that than me, but there are a lot of different models. There are about 70 different models for FRBs, and we have no idea what these are. So today, my talk is not going to be about how we extract science from these observations using machine learning. The machine learning is actually what enables us to do this science in the presence of anthropogenic noise or radio frequency interference, which is RFI. So how do we search for FRBs? So one thing that we get is called dispersion, which means that light travels differently at different frequencies. In the case of radio waves passing through plasma, high frequency radio waves travel faster. So what we get typically from the telescope is a dynamic spectrum, which is shown on the top right here. And this grayscale is basically the intensity as a function of frequency on the vertical axis and time on the horizontal axis. And you can see that the pulse arrives earlier at high frequencies because the high frequencies have traveled faster, and it arrives later at low frequencies. Now, the shape of this curve is very well understood from physics. It is frequency to the -2, but the magnitude of the shift depends on the number of electrons that the wave interacts with from the source to the observer. So it's just integrating the number of electrons, right? And if you know the dispersion measure, you can say you can figure out, you can integrate this intensity across frequency, and you can come up with something called the time profile, right? But if you don't know the dispersion a priori, so you have to search for it, and you have to find exactly which dispersion measure you get the pulse at, right? And this signal is extremely sparse. The dispersion can be 20 to 30 seconds. So the sweep actually comes across 20 to 30 seconds, but the signal width is only a millisecond, or can be even smaller, right? So you have a signal dilution of 10 to the 4 or more, right? Also, because of certain technical reasons, you have to have 16,000, you have to have a lot of frequency channels, right? So in the case of this telescope CHIME, which I work on, and I'm going to talk mostly about, you have about 16,000 frequency channels in this dynamic spectrum, which means that the signal to noise ratio is spread out across these 16,000 channels, and the SNR in each channel is about 0.1. So again, you're mostly looking at extremely diluted, sparse signals. So the way this CHIME telescope operates is that you're looking at a video camera on the sky, right? Instead of RGB, there's 3 colors, you have 16,000 different colors, right? And instead of taking images at 30 frames per second, you're taking 1,000 frames per second. And instead of having a megapixel camera, you have a much more modest thing. There are about 1,024 pixels, which each pixel is, we call a beam, right? And the data rate coming out is about 800 gigabytes per second. That's about 1 petabyte every 20 minutes. Clearly, you can't store this data, so we have to process all of this in real time. And all of that is done in these shipping containers where we have a few hundred computers sitting in there with GPUs and CPUs. And you do all of this and you barely detect 2 to 3 FRBs per day, right? So there are a huge number of FRBs yet to be detected. And this is the highest rate of FRB detection, which we have achieved with CHIME. Other telescopes in the world detect 1 FRB every few weeks or so, okay? Now, the way you do FRB detection is you have to do a lot of data cleaning because most of your data is just noise and crap, right? Then you do de-dispersion, and I put a loop here because you have to do different dispersion trials. You try for different dispersion measures. Then you do a matched filtering where you say, okay, is there something which goes blip in my time profile? And you do that for each dispersion trial as a function of time. Then you do some clustering and classification. You say, I'm getting these signals from these different pathways. Are these interesting, right? And then you ask, is this astrophysical at all, or is this still from terrestrial sources? And then you can try to figure out what its physical properties, and you can try to do science with it. And machine learning can apply in multiple stages of this. In pretty much every stage, we can add machine learning. Some of it we have already implemented. I will highlight a couple of things which we haven't implemented, we have thought about, but we have not had the resources to do. Right. So machine learning is used to classify RFI or radio frequency interference versus astrophysical signals. And we have achieved, figuring out one part of astrophysical signal in a million RFI events, right, with a precision of 99% and a completeness of about 95%. That's a little bit SNR dependent. SNR is signal to noise ratio. We have also used CNNs to process the dynamic spectra directly. You take the dynamic spectrum, pass it through a CNN like this. In this case, you have a CNN, you have a you have a dynamic spectrum here, you have a dispersed spectrum here, and then you pass it through a CNN and you try to identify if something is interesting or not. But this is assuming a particular shape of FRBs. I'll come to that a bit more later. We are now slowly getting into using these sort of CNNs for classification and understanding the physical properties of FRBs. Yeah. Right. So now let's talk about what sort of things we can do. One thing is that FRBs come in very different shapes. This used to be the quintessential shape of an FRB. It's broadband, it's visible across all frequencies, it's very narrow, and you have this nice scattering tail. But turns out FRBs come in all sorts of shapes and forms, right? We have these narrow band ones. There are things with multiple components. This is something called a sad trombone, which seems to go down in frequency. You have these components which are always marching down in frequency. And we have some hand-wavy evidence that most of the times we see these kinds of bursts from non-repeaters, and most of the times we see these kinds of bursts from repeaters. So there can be some sort of a astrophysical source difference as well. So again, I'm putting up a gallery of these FRBs. You have these kinds of things which are very narrow band. You have these very exotic things which, one in 3,000 FRBs is like this. So where you have these multiple components, right? And it's very periodic. So could these be coming from different sources? Could this be a merger of two neutron stars, right? Could there be similar multi-wavelength events which we need to look for? That's what we want to try to identify very quickly. And this has been done before for gamma ray bursts or GRBs. So gamma ray bursts come in two types. There are short gamma ray bursts and long gamma ray bursts. And the original classification was basically on the duration itself, right? So short gamma ray bursts occur in hundreds of milliseconds. Long gamma ray bursts occur from 2 to 1,000 seconds. And it turns out that if you do a TSNE clustering of these light curves at different energies, so you're plotting at different X-ray energies, you can plot the light curves, and you can do a TSNE clustering of this 4-dimensional space into a 2-dimensional space, and you get very clear distinctions between these two types of sources, right? And what is interesting is that the time scale, if you look at, actually has overlap. So you can have short GRBs which are actually long, and long GRBs which are actually short in time, right? So there can be similar things which can be done for FRBs, and this is something which I'm working on with my student Ajay Kumar and a colleague Ashish Mahabar. Right. The next part is the bane of our existence, which is radio frequency interference. There is anthropogenic signals from all sorts of things, TV stations, cell phones. But there's a timer now. I'm sorry about that. I didn't notice. Sorry. So there are satellites, aircraft, all sorts of things, right? Transformers, even bad connections between transformers. High voltage lines will cause sparking, which causes broadband RFI. And you see all sorts of weird signals. These are just a very small sample of examples. And this is particularly important for a telescope like GMRT, which sits in the Pune-Nashik region, which is developing rapidly. There is a lot of industrialization that is happening. And of course, we can't prevent industrialization. So we have to make sure that we can work with RFI, right? So the ratio of finding these transients is 1 in 10 to the 7 or so. So you really have to work hard to find transients in RFI. There's also a dynamic range problem. RFI is far brighter than the transients that you're trying to search for, right? So here are a couple of ideas. We are currently processing each beam on the sky independently, right? So you have intensity as a function of frequency and time, but between multiple beams, the distribution of RFI intensities and the distribution of astrophysical intensities can be different, right? Because if you have a camera which is focused on the sky, a star will be sharp, right? You will have most of its light falls on 1 pixel. But if you have somebody puts a flashlight next to the camera, the glare will be across multiple pixels. So you have a defocused image versus a focused image, right? So it's kind of similar. You have RFI, which is local to you, which is within a few kilometers of your telescope. That's in the near field. Astrophysical sources are in the far field, right? So you can try to understand what the differences are in the distribution of these intensities. So you can imagine you take a bunch of different beams and you put it in through a neural network black box and ask what fraction of the intensity in this pixel is because of astrophysical signal and what fraction of it is because of local RFI, and can we subtract it correctly, right? And this is obviously has to be robust to different RFI shapes, different sources of RFI. There could be a car here, a transformer there, and so on. The other thing is you can do some sort of anomaly detection. Right now we are assuming that FRBs are these nice broadband shapes We necessarily have clean dispersion. We have a time profile which looks the way we want it to. We are assuming just a slight blip, but what if there are periodic signals which are really broad? We don't know what. There is a danger that we'll find exactly what we were out to find. We made a pipeline to find FRBs of a certain type. We found them, but what about the missing ones, right? So you could imagine you can do some sort of a anomaly detection. You can look at the same data and ask, is there some sort of transient, irrespective of the shape or intensity, which is not RFI, which is something that comes and goes very quickly, right? So you can just take this same data and push it through another system which would detect anomalies. Right. So now let me talk a little bit about the efforts that we have ongoing at GMRT, and Div is leading this working group. There is a lot of effort for mitigating RFI around GMRT. GMRT sits in a circle of 15-kilometer radius. There are 30 antennas distributed here. 13 of them are right in the center. And there are a lot of villages and towns in here. The Pune-Nashik railway and highway are going to pass through here. And there's a lot of activity going on. And this RFI doesn't just affect transient science, it affects all observations. So if you're doing spectral line observations of galaxies, if you're trying to understand galaxy mergers, all of this is going to affect the sensitivity and the efficiency of UGMRT. And this is, of course, going to get worse with the introduction of 5G and 6G and so on. So one of the things that we do is local outreach and education, make sure that the farmers are using the correct kind of LED bulbs and so on. But we also need to actually implement systems in the telescope which can get rid of RFI. So there is some part of that is already done with analog systems. We can build filters to take out the police wireless band and so on. The Kaushal Buch and others have made digital systems which can remove RFI at the FPGA level. But new RFI will keep propping up. So we have to identify new RFI as it comes along, find where it is, go there and tell them to stop it. Right? So we have to identify, so the question is, can we identify new sources of RFI from antenna level data? Right? Can we subtract this RFI from the data in real time? Can we use satellite imagery? We started a small thing where we are doing this manually right now, but can we look at images, satellite images, and see, okay, there's a new industrial development coming up at this location, so we better go and check out what they are doing. Right. So now let me change tack a little bit. These are slides from my colleague Yogesh Vadadekar, who is also online, in case I butcher the explanations. But there is a lot of machine learning which is already done for doing science from catalogs and images. So you can imagine that you have different types of galaxies, and you have images of different types of galaxies. For example, the one shown here, and you want to classify the morphologies of these galaxies because they refer to different science cases. So that has successfully been done with optical images, with radio images. You can also do regression. So one of the things that happens, this is what Shravan mentioned in his talk and Girish mentioned in his talk as well, is that we have a fairly good understanding of stellar and galaxy properties. And there are astrophysical models which will tell you, given the galaxy with this kind of a star formation history and so on, this is what the observation should look like. That's reasonably easy to do. But doing the reverse is very hard. That's very computationally intensive. So the part is, can you take observations, so catalogs and images, which can often be sparse. So maybe you observed this galaxy with this telescope, but I observed this galaxy with another telescope. Can I combine this sort of sparse and varied information together to go back to stellar and galaxy properties, right? And so these are a bunch of publications which you can refer to for Yogesh's work. And with that, I will stop here with this summary slide. There are 4 different aspects which I talked about. Mostly our work right now is in enabling science and keeping it working through increasing development in India, right? And still letting us do our job. So if anybody has any questions, come and talk to me. Thank you.
Sorry, no time for questions if you don't mind.
Okay.
So the last talk, Prayush, can you, so if you can stop sharing here, then
Yeah.
Prayush will immediately share. The last talk, of the faculty members here, and then we'll switch to a few more industry talks, Google next, and then we'll have an open discussion for a little while. Thank you.
Sorry? I'll leave. Okay.
Okay. I hope you guys can see my slides as well as hear me.
We can't hear you very clearly, Prayush.
Okay, how about now?
A little louder. I think that should be good.
Let me just fix my microphone. 1 second. Okay, hopefully this is working better.
Yeah.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Prayush Kumar, and today I wanted to talk about the promising results that machine learning and AI applications have already demonstrated or / promised in the field of gravitational wave astronomy, and also to discuss where we can go from here in this field. So the field of gravitational astronomy is a new branch of astronomy where we, instead of observing electromagnetic radiation, we look for gravitational waves arriving at Earth from all sorts of sources out there in the universe. At the moment, we have 3 instruments that are capable of detecting these waves, the 2 LIGO instruments in the US and the Virgo instrument in Italy that I'm showing pictures of here. These are all interferometric detectors capable of detecting gravitational waves of extremely small amplitude. So our primary sources right now are inspiraling 2-body systems of black holes and neutron stars, which are some of the most compact objects in the universe that inspiral under the radiation reaction of the gravitational waves they emit. And as the orbit loses energy, the 2 objects come closer and closer, ultimately to merge and form a single black hole that sheds away its asymmetries and forms a nice curved black hole sitting quietly at the end. And the entire wave train that this process emits is passes through Earth and through these interferometric detectors to be observed by us, right? So this is a relatively new field. Only in 2015 were we able to actually make the very first detections. It took about 4 decades of preparation, both in the instrument, on the instrument side as well as the software side, to actually be able to see these extremely weak signals. And since then, we have observed nearly 100 mergers of 2 black hole systems, which I'm showing here in this visualization, which shows the masses of the inspiraling binaries, as well as the mass of the post-merger black hole that these binaries form that have already been seen with LIGO. So all of these blue circles here, they represent the black holes that LIGO Virgo have already seen. And the orange circles at the bottom here represent the neutron stars in double neutron star systems that LIGO Virgo has seen. And they can be compared to the observations of neutron stars from the electromagnetic spectrum that that are shown in the red dots and the yellow circles here. And so we can see that already LIGO Virgo has contributed in terms of being able to see the most number of black holes that any spectrum in astronomy. Okay, so so in this talk, essentially, I'm going to focus more on the machine learning AI applications to this field and not delve into the classical methods that we have been so far using. Right. So here is a brief flowchart that describes the anatomy of this entire research field as it stands right now. So we have our compact binary sources out there in the universe that emit gravitational waves, which are observed by the detectors here on Earth. The data coming from these detectors is passed through a recalibration phase that converts the raw data into a strain time series data, which is supposed to contain noise plus a signal, gravitational wave signal time series, if the signal is present. Of course, if not, then it simply contains instrument noise, right? And so from here, the challenges begin. So the first challenge, of course, is to actually detect the presence of gravitational wave signals in this data time series that we get from our instruments, right? And that forms this task is performed by the gravitational wave detection engine, which is so far based on a match filtering algorithm and some other signal consistency tests that took a couple of decades to develop. And the output essentially from this entire complicated stage is something like this. It's a list of triggers or possible gravitational wave events with a single number called their signal to noise ratio, or SNR, that measures their probability of being an actual signal. So what we find is that most of the triggers coming out of this stage are actually purely noise triggers. They're purely artifacts of instrument noise interacting with this detection engine, right? And you can see from the numbers on the y-axis here that we have millions of noise triggers. Thankfully, the way we designed these engines is such that all these noise triggers, they cluster together at low values of the signal to noise ratio statistic, or maybe a log likelihood statistic, depending on which particular variant of this engine we are using. And actual gravitational wave signals, they stand out above the crowd. They stand out above this entire background if we are doing this detection stage correctly. And that is how we are able to say that, hey, there is a signal present in our data, and we can state a certain statistical confidence to which we know that this is a real event and not a noise artifact. Now, once we have seen the signal, this becomes the input to our second stage in this entire pipeline, which is a Bayesian parameter estimation framework, which takes this data and compares it against our general relativity based waveform models, specifically millions of waveforms generated by these models, in order to reverse engineer the source properties for this signal, the properties of the actual binary, the astrophysical environment around that binary, etc., that led to the emission of this particular gravitational wave signal, are calculated within this Bayesian parameter estimation framework. Again, classically, right? And then these catalogs of source properties for all the gravitational wave events we see are used for further downstream science, such as estimation of the astrophysical formation scenarios in which such two-body systems form, the population statistics of these two-body systems, information about the expansion of a universe that they may carry with them, and other fun phenomena that we may want to measure from these signals. But in this talk, I'm not going to talk about this downstream science. I'm only going to talk about the upstream pieces that we need to make all of the downstream science possible in the first place, right? And that is where neural networks and AI have already been applied to show promising results, right? So that would be these stages here. So I'm going to talk about these two main big questions of this of the field of gravitational astronomy, and how ML and AI have already shown some promising results here. So let's talk about the detection problem first, right? So why is detection hard? Well, it's hard because the signal's space-time is incredibly stiff, and even black holes are only able to create fluctuations in the geometry of space-time at a very, very small amplitude, with a very, very small amplitude, right? So our typical signals are almost always dominated by instrument noise. And you can see this is a typical long duration signal shown in a red trace here, embedded within this noise that purely is of instrumental origin, right? If we convert this time series into a time frequency map, we are barely able to see the presence of the signal, at least with the help of our naked eyes, right? So this makes the detection of these signals difficult. And the other thing that makes their detection difficult is that oftentimes there are glitches in our instruments that can cause ringing in this time series, ringing like features in the time series that is output from the detectors. And these noise like features can often mimic gravitational wave signals. So not only are algorithms supposed to dig them out from noise, they're also supposed to discriminate them from non-Gaussian features of the noise to begin with. So between these two, that's why it took a couple of decades for the traditional methods to be perfected, or at least brought to the level of perfection that they are today, right? So neural networks and, well, machine learning, in fact, was first applied to the detection problem as early as 2016 when George and the two researchers at NCSA and UIUC, they took a toy problem where they took a substantially simple description of the signals that we expect, and they embedded them in instrument noise, and they showed that using a deep CNN, convolutional neural network, it is quite possible to actually uncover the signal's presence with a speed up of more than 10 to the power 3 when compared to the traditional match filtering search algorithms, right? Now, why is the speed up important? The speed up is important because we want to be alerted to the presence of signals as quickly as possible, because often these merger events, when the two objects actually collide with each other, the collision can sometimes produce electromagnetic radiation. So if we are able to know about these events very quickly, then we can pass along that information to our electromagnetic observer counterparts, and we can request them to point their telescopes out in the sky and look for electromagnetic radiation from these events. So that would be a complete multi-messenger observation of a single event in multiple spectra, right? So that's where the importance of this speed up comes in. And they also showed that the deep CNNs are actually better than some other algorithms in machine learning, which is what these two panels here depict. So a couple of years later, another incremental work showed that they can also attain a good level of sensitivity with traditional CNNs, including in the presence of higher harmonics of the gravitational wave signals, as you can see. So in the top three panels are the dominant mode gravitational wave emissions shown in orange, and the blue curves show what the signals look like in the presence of higher harmonics. And you can see that these higher harmonics can substantially change the frequency content, especially towards the end of these signals, right? And so this work was an incremental work which showed that even this can be detected. Again, same year, another group in the UK, they applied CNNs to this detection problem again. And the key feature of this work was they did a more careful statistical analysis of the output of these neural network probabilities. And when they applied this to one of the events, GW150914, you can see the strain time series from the Hanford and Livingston detector in these two panels. And you can see the output of the CNN in terms of the detection probability as shown in green here. And near the time of the event, you can see that the network clearly detects the presence of an event, right? And so they also, as earlier papers show, that for high enough signal to noise ratio, say above values of 10 and higher, the detection efficiency of these networks can be quite high. Now, remember, none of these papers have yet talked about discriminating these their detections from otherwise noise features, and that is one of the open questions in this field. So another paper last year that we put out does something different. Here, what we did was we took really long signals which are characteristic of binary neutron star merger signals, and they can be easily up to half a minute or even longer in length, right? And if you look at the time frequency spectrogram, they are actually visible in this, right? So what this paper showed that it is possible to use CNNs to actually alert us about the presence of an incoming signal before the signal has completely arrived. So in these 6 panels here, the time of 0 here is the time at which the two neutron stars merge, or the black hole and a neutron star, they actually merge with each other. So this t equal to 0 corresponds to the end of the signal right here in this panel, right? And we can see that for a 5 solar mass black hole colliding with a 1.4 solar mass neutron star, or a 10 solar mass black hole colliding with the same neutron star, for such systems, the particular neural network that we chose can actually alert us up to 10 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds in advance before the entire signal has actually been seen by the LIGO Virgo detector, right? So this is moving more towards what we want ideally in terms of being able to send out alerts to our electromagnetic telescopic partners, right? So moving again to the second problem now, which is once we have detected the presence of these signals, can we reverse engineer the property of the sources of these signals? So again, the difficulty in measuring the source parameters are the same as before. The first is that the signal is much weaker than the instrument noise. Second is we also want ideally to be able to know these source parameters in low latency, which would mean within a few seconds to a couple of minutes of the arrival of the signal, right? And that is important because if we know that a particular event is originating from a neutron star, only then we will be alerting our electromagnetic partners, EM observation partners, and not when the event is coming from the collision of two black holes alone. So this would eventually lead to a lot of saving in terms of telescopic times. So, and finally, when compared to the current match filtering based Bayesian analyses, neural networks can hopefully, give source parameters faster, even if not in low latency. We can certainly hope for them to give us faster results than what we currently get, which can easily take between hours to a few days for each event, right? And this definitely becomes a problem when we enter into the next generation of our instruments, where we likely will see several events per week, right? So current methods are definitely not scalable to the future. So here to this problem, there have been a couple of papers, although all of them have been more.
Sorry, Prayush, is your talk much longer or?
It's a couple of more slides.
Okay.
Yeah. So all of these applications are rather preliminary in nature, and they either attack a toy version of the full problem, or well, actually, all of them attack only a toy version of the problem. So here is one paper from 2020 where they take a variation autoencoder and they try to measure the source parameters from a very simple non-spinning binary black hole system. And while they're able to measure the masses, for example, M1 and M2 are the masses here, the DL is the distance to the source, their results do not quite satisfy the statistical purity that we need from the probability distributions that they give us, as you can see from the PP plot not being a diagonal line here. Another paper in the same year using roughly the same neural network topology gives much better results. They can be compared to conventional MCMC results, as has been done in this picture, and they get much more controlled posteriors. But again, they attack the toy version of a problem. And finally, this last paper that I wanted to talk about, they use neural networks to learn the one-dimensional and two-dimensional posterior distributions directly. And for each parameter, they train an independent neural network. So this approach is promising, but it's actually prohibitively expensive in terms of training the networks to begin with. So to summarize, I want to point out that ML and AI have already been applied to the key problems in gravitational wave astronomy, but the current applications are mostly at the proof of concept stage. And the main problem, as we in the field understand, is that it's not yet clear how we interpret the results coming from these neural networks in terms of the statistical confidences that we can put in the gravitational wave detections that these AI algorithms will make, or the posterior probability distributions that these neural networks provide us with. Also, none of the current applications are quite scalable to a future detector network of 5 instruments, of which LIGO India will be a major member of, right? And sorry. So this is where we stand currently in terms of how ML and AI have already been applied. And clearly the results show a lot of promise, but in the future, a lot more maturity is required as to how how nuanced is our application of AI algorithms to our problems. Currently, the application is more at a black box level, but I feel it will take, we will need to break down the problems into smaller bits and pieces and apply machine learning algorithms to smaller bits and pieces to come up with a unified and statistically purer framework for doing inferencing on our gravitational wave data. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Prayush. So now we have Praneeth Netrapalli from Google. Google Research India, that is.
Firstly, thanks to Shravan for organizing this, and also thanks to all the speakers in the morning for the fantastic talks. So in this talk, I'll just give a brief overview of Google Research India and also highlight some of the work that we are doing, which I think could be relevant in the light of like the previous talks. And in the end, I'll end with a few ways to collaborate and how to maybe take this forward. So Google Research India is actually a new lab. So it was launched in 2019, but within the last 2-3 years, we have grown quite a bit. And overall, we have 3 directions in which we evaluate our work. The first one is scientific impact. So what are the kind of scientific contributions that we are making to the community, to the scientific community, as measured in terms of, say, publications at top research conferences or open source projects and so on. The second one is societal impact, and we have several projects which are in close collaboration with NGOs on topics of public interest, such as like public health, agriculture, ecology, and so on. And finally, we would like to do research contributions that can help and improve Google's products as well. Okay. And in terms of technical areas, so these are some of the key areas in our lab at the moment. And in particular, I would like to call out maybe computer vision, natural language understanding, machine learning optimization, cognitive sciences, and so on. So in the next few slides, I'll highlight some of the sample projects from some of these technical areas, which I thought would be relevant in the light of like the previous talks. So let me start with computer vision. So one of the projects I would like to highlight in this context is how we can use satellite images to estimate things that are on the ground. So some of our recent work has evaluated the efficacy of self-supervised learning methods, which are unsupervised, which just look at like the satellite data, and then eventually try to estimate like how can we estimate like the river bed from other kind of land, and similarly like land use, and similarly, so this one is for the water quality or like groundwater levels based on just satellite images. Okay, so these are some of the kind of things that we have done in computer vision. Moving on to natural language understanding. So we now have, so GPT-3 was mentioned quite a few times in the earlier talk. So we know that there exists like BERT and GPT-3 and so on, like very powerful natural language models. But these models are very, very advanced, particularly for English and other languages, where we have a lot of training data that's available on the web. But if you come to say Indian languages, where there is much less amount of training data, open training data available on the web, the models performance is not as great. And our team has done work on developing models which actually work well even for Indian languages, and in particular from a technical point of view, this is called like low resource languages, where we are using leveraging data, low amounts of data from multiple languages, and somehow using all of them together to get improvements across all of the board. Okay. And we open sourced this language model called Neural recently. And finally, I would also like to highlight our work in optimization and foundational machine learning. And in particular, I felt that these are some of the things that came up in multiple talks from the morning. So the first one is out of distribution robustness. For example, if we are predicting, say, protein structure or applications to any other field like astronomy and so on, usually the test data that we are getting does not necessarily come from the same kind of training data. For example, you might get proteins from one particular source like humans and so on, and then we would like to learn something which will also tell us about proteins that occur in, say, animals or other species. And similarly, I assume that even in astronomy and other cases, so we get data from some sources and we would like to use this to gain understanding, which will enable us to do something even on different data. So we have developed algorithms which work well on out of distribution data, and this is one of the focus areas in our lab, for example. And the second one I would like to highlight is on unsupervised or self-supervised learning. And this is, so unsupervised learning is the case where we don't have any labeled information. For example, if someone gives me a picture and tells me this is a cat, this is a dog and so on, so that's called labeled information. But if I'm just given a stream of pictures, like for example, like the observations that are coming from the astronomy, like the telescopes and so on, it's all unsupervised. So nobody is telling me that this is the signal of a black hole collision or anything of that sort. So so another research direction that we are currently focusing on is on developing better unsupervised, self-supervised learning algorithms. What are the things which work in different settings and so on. And the third thing that also came up multiple times in the earlier talks is multitask learning, where we have maybe a small amount of data, but then we have different kinds of measurements on the same data, right? So these are measurements that are related because they're all on the same underlying sample, but they tell us different things about the same thing. And can we use this kind of data to actually require very little amount of data from each of the different dimensions, but at the same time helps us learn more efficiently about all of them together, because somehow all of them share some common structure. Okay? And finally, we also have done some work in the past on understanding whether quantum computers can speed up certain canonical optimization tasks. And so I just wanted to highlight that one here. So we also have a center for AI for social good. And in particular, in the past year, we have had a focus on 3 different areas. So the first one is public health, the second one is agriculture, and the third one is conservation. And we have called for proposals, and the proposals have come from like academic partners, both in India and outside of India. And then they partnered with NGOs to actually go from like a research stage to actually a deployment stage and make it go through a full cycle. And Google is supporting so the lab is supporting all of these projects with both funds as well as like cloud compute credits and some amount of headcount and so on. Okay. So this is my last slide, and I would just like to wrap by saying that usually we have a lot of research collaborations with faculty in academia on like the topics of mutual interest. And in addition to that, we also have research grants and programs, both for in terms of like faculty awards and so on, as well as fellowships for PhD students, cloud credits for compute resources and so on. At the same time, finally, we also have opportunities for continuing these collaborations as internships or student researchers visiting faculties, postdoc, and so on. So this is all I wanted to say. Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions to Praneeth? I have one question. So of the topics that you've seen, are there things that interest you and your team and you would like to collaborate with us on and so on?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, actually, I've been talking to Shruti about problems related to estimating the structure of molecules and so on. But I mean, many of the topics I was hearing for the first time, but I see that a lot of things could be interesting. It would be maybe good to figure out how to maybe continue the conversation further. Yeah.
Shubhadeep, you want to ask?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I have a question regarding the process of applying for a project and then being selected and working with you guys. So what is the procedure? Is there a formal procedure which you need to follow for applying for a collaboration with Google and being selected for working?
So in terms of collaborations, they are more people driven. So like if people from both the sides are interested, like they just get together and get started on working on something. In terms of like research grants and programs and so on, there is usually a particular cycle for each of these programs, and there will be a formal application process and things like that.
Okay, great. So it will be great if we can come to know about the process. I'm interested.
So yeah, so maybe I can share some of these ways with Shravan, and then he can circulate them.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Praneeth, just to ask you, you know, in the US, etc., as you know very well, a model which has emerged is that people are partly spending time in academia and partly at, you know,
right.
institutions like Google, right? And it's working very well.
Right.
We have not so far been successful in operationalizing such a model in TIFR, but we are trying. And I was curious if there's an Indian institution which has successfully operationalized this, you know, an academic institution which allows a part-time appointment at the institution, part-time with Google. Or
yeah.
Microsoft.
So I don't know about a part-time appointment. Like the current way we have is about this visiting faculty, and people can come spend like 3 months, 6 months, a year, up to a year
okay.
with us.
And it can be on a sort of continuing basis, like for a few years you spend 3 months at Google and go back.
I think, yeah, he's talking about something different, right?
Yeah. So so in the US, for example, I know of appointments which are like 1 day a week and something like that. Those at the moment I don't think we currently have, and this might be something again we can continue discussing and seeing if there is a way to figure out other modalities other than like the visiting faculty that might be more suited and appropriate. Yeah.
So I think in the US and all, a lot of the engagements are also institutional, right? And this, like from both MSR and from you, but it's more individual driven. But
right.
I guess that's kind of the broad question, that here it's more of an institutional, a suggestion of an institutional engagement. So that would be nice to consider.
I see. I'll certainly convey this. Thank you.
Thanks, Praneeth.
Thank you, Shravan.
Okay, so the next speaker is, I believe, let me just is Harshal. Are you online?
Yes, I'm online.
So please share your screen and. Just to say one thing, Harshal is at ThoughtWorks, which I didn't know, but was collaborating quite closely with people at NCRA, as Divya mentioned. So they have some experience already with TIFR. I believe they're certainly spending time. I don't think they're following a consortium model or anything, but they're certainly spending a lot of time helping NCRA people. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you can all see my screen. If someone could confirm.
Yeah, Harshal, we can see that. We
Sure.
can see your full screen.
Thank you. So it's a great opportunity to present our initiative as well as the work that we have been doing. Thank you so much to TIFR ICTS, especially Shravan, for this initiative. And because I think some of you would be hearing about ThoughtWorks and the initiative, what we call as engineering for research or IFORA, for the first time. I have few introductory slides, so but I will try to pace them appropriately so that we could finish in time. But if you find a slide interesting enough, I could slow down and explain the things. So we already collaborate with research organizations on some of the computational challenges. 30-meter telescope is something that we have been working for the last 5 years or so in developing their control system software, as well as user interfaces and data management. For SCAR radio telescope, we have been working with IUCA as well as NCRA. And we have also been working with Ashoka University for an epidemic simulation software at a very large scale, what we call as Bharat Sim. And this work has been funded by Gates Foundation. So these are some of the examples that I have given. And how do we collaborate? We identify a problem, then we engage for solving the problem as a proof of concept, work towards solving this problem completely to a satisfactory extent. And then once the solution reaches to a point, it could be published. Then we co-publish and also try to release this source code in the public domain. And finally, after a few months, we try to co-explore for funding. This is mainly for sustenance. So how did E4R begin? So we started asking this question, have we taken the progress for granted? That includes laws of the nature, intangible things like that, but also tangible things like seeds, materials, medicines, telecommunication systems, computing, hardware and software both. But not only these, but also policies such as health policies, economic policies, ecological and education policies. And we perceived that there are some computational challenges which scientists and policymakers face often while working on these. So what do scientists and policymakers face? The nature is complex, of course. If someone asks me what am I made up of, I can answer as atoms, which is the right answer. But I can also say I'm made up of cells, which is also the another correct answer. So depending upon the abstraction that someone is working upon, we look at this as a the multi-scale or multi-level view of the universe. And complexity emerges out of these via interactions like scale, diversity, network, and dynamics. So how do scientists observe the universe, study the universe? So evolution of scientific apparatus we see over the last 400 years. The Galilean telescope, which was pretty simple, but if you look at European Southern Observatory's very large telescope, it's fairly complicated apparatus. And the way the observations are recorded also had changed. So what used to be these little scribing of Galileo has now become something like a data grid. So this is a data grid at CERN. Now you need to make sense of the data in order to discover the science out of it. So how does it happen? So you have this role of computational science. You take nature data, which could be empirical as well as hypothesized, and then you build nature models out of it. And some of those nature models could survive the rigor of scientific method and could become a generally acceptable theory. So the scientific, computational sciences itself has been evolving over time. So in interest of time, I will quickly run through this. But as you can see, data science and machine learning is just one aspect of it. There are other things that are necessary. So identifying patterns and anomalies is something that data science and machine learning do. But what could be beyond that is the transdisciplinary science, where the traditional boundaries of physics, chemistry, biology, all they disappear, and it becomes an emergent continuum that needs explanation. Future we don't know. So how does this computational science work? So it is a complex approach, definitely, because there is a complexity of nature models. Like, for example, we saw in the earlier talks, whenever we think of cells interacting with each other or neurons interacting with each other, it's a complex electro mechanical or electrochemical phenomena. So there is complexity associated with the natural phenomena, and there is complexity associated with the models themselves, like the software that we write. So it could be computational complexity in terms of space, time, software engineering complexities such as technical debt, and so on. So it becomes a difficult mix of two complexities together, which means that now we need to adapt the scientific method, which is the only way of doing science. It's systematic yet exploratory. There are 4 ways of doing science. We know: observations and experiment, the way Galileo did; theory building, the way Einstein did; computer simulation, the Lorentz way; and data intensive, which is the 4th paradigm of science as it is now called. And it is critical to adapt computational tools from control systems to data processing to collaboration to methods. For example, collaboration, when we speak of, imagine 5,000 authors writing single paper, how difficult it could be. Even if we consider 99% of the people spend time in building the system, and only 1% people, like 50 people, wrote that paper, it is still a complicated affair. To methods, as in crowdsourcing or citizen science, where if you need to classify a million galaxies, then 1% cannot do. So how do you come up with methods of crowdsourcing and citizen science, where this could be made possible by common people. So here scientists, they do wear multiple hats. They are, first of all, domain experts, but they also, are mathematicians, authors, speakers, academicians, salesmen, as we know, and project manager once you get the funding, and to manage the funding. But we are asking too much from them by being programmers, data scientists, and system designer now. So ThoughtWorks, in this case, intends to have a symbiotic partnership whereby we could say at least some of that computational burden could be shared, and by that way we would also be able to contribute to the progress of science as well as progress of computer science. So this is the vision with which we started. There are two observations. There are ambitious big science projects that are facing computational challenges at par or greater than those faced by the internet giants in their infancy as well as now. And the second observation is that there are advances in computer science and software engineering that can significantly contribute to progress of science. Examples could be machine learning, big data ecosystem, user interfaces, software development practices, and automation, and so on. So our vision is to build a community of academicians, scientists, and engineers working closely on solving some of the challenges associated with scientific exploration. And what we try to derive out of this, what we call as the computer science of Horizon 3. So Horizon 1, 2, and 3 is Horizon 1 is business as usual. It's a known paradigm. Horizon 2 is known challenges. The problem is very well known, but no one knows how to exactly solve this. And Horizon 3 is new frontier. We don't even know what we don't know. So in order to conserve our energies, what we call as E4R thrust areas, 6 of them. It's a holistic approach. As you can see, the 6 thrust areas have a good mapping on the scientific method. So I will quickly run through each one of them. So cyber physical systems is the way by which you write control system software, interface with sensors, actuators, and controllers, and extract data out of it. Now, once you get the data, you take to it to your data processing pipeline. That's where data intensive computing comes into picture. Think of it as a combination of old school supercomputing, high performance computing, new school big data ecosystem, as well as accelerated computing, and so on. While doing so, you also generate a lot of artifacts. You need to keep track of these artifacts in some way in a linked fashion, and that's where digital libraries come into picture. Digital libraries are the digital cousins of physical libraries, not just books, but you can also think of museums and so on. But your raw data sets, your process data sets, your algorithms, your intermediate results, your final results, everything can be linked together within this paradigm of digital libraries. In addition to that, you could also have computational models with which you could do virtual experiments. And that's where modeling and simulation comes into picture. And lab informatics is something which you can think of as running the show for a large scientific organization. Everything from managing equipments to knowledge to people, funds, and everything, but all linked again. And as well as you can also think of some automation there. And artificial intelligence is basically to add smartness to each of the things above, like a smart cyber physical system, smart data intensive computing, and so on. So here AI is not just limited to machine learning, AI as in all 3 schools of thoughts, like deductive, inductive, abductive reasoning, and so on. So as you can see here, deep learning, machine learning, these are all inner circles. AI sort of in general sits little outside of it, which also includes things such as knowledge bases and so on. So we would like to see artificial intelligence holistically. So what are some of the AI augmented scientific discovery projects that we have done at E4R? So this is the work that Dr. Divya Oberoi of NCRA has already explained in the earlier session in the morning. So this is radio solar imaging. The second one is star formation histories work that we have done with Dr. Yogesh Vadadekar at NCRA. And this was basically to identify star formation histories patterns using deep learning techniques. The third one is, which is an ongoing work for weather data analysis at IIT Bombay. In addition to that, we have also participated in the drug discovery hackathon, which is an ongoing hackathon at organized by the government of India, and we are applying some of the state-of-the-art techniques there in discovery of medicines. So here in the second case of reinforcement learning, which is an ongoing one for phase 2, and we are trying to match the protein structure with the medicine structure using reinforcement learning. And this third one is identifying the effects of medicine, side effects especially on liver, and could it cause some injuries. In addition to that, we also have applied some machine learning techniques for classification techniques, especially for amino acid chains to study their antimicrobial properties such as antifungal, antibacterial, antiviral, and so on. We have also applied, you developed some of the work outside AI, but I will, in the interest of time, I will skip this for now. This is data intensive computing and accelerated computing. This is modeling and simulation for epidemiology as well as planetary exploration and so on. So I would like to spend few minutes, minutes quickly on some of the formidable trends that we have observed so far, and we try to organize an annual event around that. So the first trend that we had observed was
sorry, Harshal, in the interest of time, can you wrap up in a minute or two if you don't mind?
Yeah, this will be wrapped in a couple of minutes. Yeah, thanks. So the first one is data deluge. We organized first symposium in 2018. The second one is complexity, as in complex systems. The third one is artificial intelligence. We asked this question, is there any logic of discovery, such as will AI ever win a Nobel Prize? And the fourth one is we just concluded couple of months ago on feeding of Moore's law. So to sort of give you a bit a brief idea about what the third symposium was about, we looked at the spectrum of AI-based automation, increasing role of AI from fully manual to fully automated. And the question asked is, will there be ever AI Nobel laureates? And we are trying to sort of search hope among the hive that between the two far apart these pieces of fully manual and fully automated, we imagine like there would be two intermediate phases where there would be computer-assisted discovery, as we are doing data-driven scientific discovery, and there could also be human-assisted discovery, where the most of the work would be done by AI, where humans will only assist in making certain decisions. There is a challenge, grand challenge that has been announced, or I guess it is being announced, which is the Nobel Turing Grand Challenge of 2050, where the idea is that AI would have made a significant enough discovery, not necessarily winning a Nobel Prize, but significant enough discovery in an automated fashion. So it's a grand pursuit and it's a grand engineering challenge, which we definitely acknowledge. According to US National Academy of Engineering and later on also by Royal Academy of Engineering in UK and Chinese Academy of Engineering, the 14 engineering grand challenge, the 14th one is our guiding principle, which is the engineer the tools for scientific discovery. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take.
Time for a question, if anyone has any. Okay, if not, can we move to Bharat? Bharat, are you there?
Yes, Shravan.
Okay, thanks. Bharat's a good friend of TIFR as well. He's been collaborating with us for a while. Hi, Bharat.
Let me share my screen. Please let me know if you're able to see my slides.
Yeah, we can see them.
Okay. All right. So Shravan wanted me to talk about Intel's vision for AI for sciences. So I'm going to sort of give you guys a brief perspective of why we are interested in this and hopefully what we are hoping to build to enable science and the kind of problems we are interested in. And I'm happy to take questions. And I'm going to use, as it happens, biology as an example as well, some of the work in that space. So here's who we are. I mean, we are ultimately a architecture research lab, and our methodology is really application-driven architecture research, which basically means we sort of bring computing to breakthrough problems that are at the intersection of domain and computational barrier. And what does that really mean? That means we're really interested in problems that need significant algorithmic innovations, massive computational scale. There's a good external metric or a benchmark that tells us about goodness. And then, of course, there's availability of data if you're talking about AI, for example. And often all of this happens in collaboration with experts from domain, from AI and HPC, whether they are in industry or in academia. And our role at the end of the day as Intel is really to be the arms and ammunition supplier to conquer science, right? I mean, this is what we get measured on internally. Have we delivered things that make, some of these enabling things that make some of these things happen, all different aspects of architecture, programming, systems and all of those kinds of things. Ultimately, that's why we call ourselves application-driven architecture research. Now, why we are interested in AI is, I mean, we all know this, and I'm not going to spend time. The important thing here is, we all of us have already become comfortable in the sense that the balance is shifting from a balance of decision making is shifting, and we are quite comfortable putting our lives in the hands of AI. For example, autonomous cars, right? AI is of course writing poetry and playing games and all of those things, and we can see that algorithms have developed significant capabilities, just shift away from perception, right, to decision making, and that has important implications. It has come obviously at a huge compute cost. This is something that earlier was alluded to as well. This is why talent goes to industry as well, because massive computational appetite is a must, and it is growing. The interesting thing though is more of this is going to happen, right? I mean, this is where AI is today. We are talking about trillion parameter models. We're talking about data mapped to Euclidean space. I fully expect we would have a 100 trillion parameter model coming 2022, 2023. Graphs as input data will become predominant. Shravan earlier referred to physics-inspired neural networks, causality, neural ODs, PDs, all of these things are likely to happen sooner than later. And this again has huge implications for science, right? I think frontiers in science will build on this foundation, and I believe the other way around as well, that significant AI capabilities will get built, which are foundational to AI out of science. And of course, underneath it, the compute appetite will continue to grow, the demand will continue to grow, and hence our interest, right? And the reason I sort of believe that is I think we are at the cusp of what I call a new frontier, right? There are very few problems in the old world used to be, at least in science, where we had some mathematical equations, and Einstein came along or a Newton came along, and we had somebody write a nice mathematical equation that was good in prediction. But there are very few problems in the world that really have all of that stuff, and those luminaries come once in generations and once in century. But thankfully what we have is data now, and that data is essentially going to go from an inside out world to an outside in world, where we are able to decipher what's happening inside of these complex worlds, just looking at the data and being able to look further than that, right? I mean, that's sort of really what our excitement as far as AI and intersection of science is concerned. And there are many of these problems. I mean, this climate change, right? What will be an impact in a particular area? Can we really estimate uncertainty, for example? We talked about protein machines, or molecular machines, or morphable wings, or life sciences in general, right? I mean, there's a complex phenomena where there's no mathematical equation known, multi-scale resolution, the interaction dynamics are extremely complex. And if we hope for a brute force to come along, brute force compute to come along, it's going to be a while. I mean, it's probably going to be decades, a decade, 2 decades out, because every time we go, 10x in a fine grain resolution, we are talking about 3x more computational barrier. And I think AI in that sense is already telling us that we can go much faster than what otherwise Moore's law could do, right? In terms of novel AI algorithms that will replace or augment brute force computation by bringing approximation into play, right? And of course, when we are doing some approximations, domain knowledge becomes critical to algorithm development. Now, this is a work that we've been doing with Shravan, and in many ways, I think it's just the beginning, as he calls it, and he has much bolder ambitions. But the fact that AI could do something that would take months earlier to do in a matter of seconds itself tells you that there is foundational capability there. And this has been again something We've been engaged for about a year or so. This is from a science point of view, but I think here's why we are interested in biology as well. I mean, in addition to the physics side of the world, I think biology is like a perfect place to learn structures, complex structures, and some of those examples were given earlier. Causality is huge in biology, that we really need to understand it. Use of AI in simulations, and whether to do trillions of score computations, how do we approximate stuff to deduce all of these things is going to be fundamental. So biology in that sense represents an exciting opportunity. Similarly, on the drug discovery side, or proteins design side, right? I mean, search space is massive. So I kind of earlier referred to computational barrier, and you can sort of see the examples of some applications here where computational barrier is so massive that you need both algorithmic and computational innovations, right? And this, for example, one of the problems we've been working on, and we call it Lambda 0, where the ambitious goal is that if we were, today's state-of-the-art physics-based simulations can search 10 to the power 9 molecules. And by the way, that's roughly the scale of internet today, right? I mean, web pages is of the order of billions. The goal is, can we go to 10 to the power 18 molecules, right? Of course, the drug space is much, much larger, 10 to the power 60. And if we really were to do true physics and solve, some Schrodinger's equations or whatever, we were never going to finish it. And if we do it today with brute force method, 10 to the power 18, it's going to take, I think, 1 billion years on today's state-of-the-art platforms to actually search this kind of space. So there's work that we have underneath going on with the Montreal Institute of Learning, with Yoshua Bengio's group, where there's innovation on graph neural networks, algorithmic side, and then obviously sort of saying, how do we speed those algorithms up quite significantly, make them computationally feasible, so that we can do search in this large hyperdimensional space. And one of the, this is the arms and the ammunition side of it. One of the components that is being used in this work, for example, is graph neural networks. And again, this is an emerging area in AI. Like I said, I think graphs are going to become big, graph as input data. And this was paper sort of we published, I think, last year around how our implementation of graph neural networks, where we had to do novel parallel algorithms for it. Again, this is, in my mind, the beginning. We're still talking 100 million graph nodes. We will probably see graph nodes running into billions and edges running into trillions. And then how do we really scale that kind of problem is going to be an interesting computational challenge. So similarly, another example that we have from biology, for example, and again, this I'm giving these more as a sense of what we look for in problems and the kind of challenges we try to work on. ScanPy is a very popular tool for single cell genomic analysis. There's a popular benchmark around 1.3 million mouse brain cells. Is an end-to-end workload, if you will, where you're starting with some cell gene feature map or activity matrix, and you want to go, you're trying to go through all of these different stages of all the way from data processing to some visualization finally. And earlier, what used to, for example, off-the-shelf CPU implementation, and that's what we got compared against a year ago or so on GPUs. They essentially CPU was shown to be taking 5 hours, GPU was shown to be taking 11 minutes. Huge difference, right? Our lab kind of looked at this problem and said that doesn't seem to make sense, right? I mean, we ought to be able to do better. Of course, we have larger interests in biology, and I'll come to that in my last slide, which is coming up. Is we kind of looked at this whole problem and said, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. And today, for example, the same problem on CPU, we can take just 5 minutes, right? And it's an end-to-end problem, right? In some sense, debunking this whole idea that AI cannot happen on CPUs, if you will, right? And this is what we are after at the end of the day. I mean, this is kind of what I and Shravan and many of our collaborators we've often talked about is what is our vision for AI for sciences and what do I hope to build. And since I said in the beginning that we are the arms and ammunition supplier to help scientists like yourself conquer science, our aim is to drive a full innovation across the stack, and this means hardware, software, co-design. And it includes all of these elements from our perspective, right? There is an algorithmic component to it. Things that I think are interesting is, learning on large graphs. I mentioned about structure, search, causality, anomaly detection, zero-shot learning. These are all very, very interesting from a science point of view. Are foundational to AI as well. I think we will need to build a data management system that serves scientific needs. I mean, there is obviously always a big, and there's I guess a controversial name of the paper as well that I sort of marked at the bottom. Big data, is this astronomical or genomical? Irrespective of that, we would want to serve needs of both. And what this requires is for scientists to be able to use software tools or software capabilities easily. We need to think of a data management system that's able to do it seamlessly, such that it's one click for the rest of the world. On whether you want to go from a laptop or you want to scale to a cloud, how does it happen, right? What does that data management system look like? So we have research in that space as well. And then of course, some of these things may require security, privacy, and those things. Again, research is in that space as far as Intel is concerned. And we fully expect compute to grow quite significantly. How do we deliver next 3 orders of magnitude in just simple raw compute processing? What kind of compute does it need to be? That's again an area of interest for us. And then of course, while we grow compute, we got to feed the beast as well. So, and again, today's state of the art memory bandwidths, when we look at high bandwidth memory and that GPUs or state of the art CPUs will have, they're still of the order of single terabytes per second. Clearly, if you're growing compute this much already, in fact, actually we need hundreds of terabytes per second kind of. So what do we need to do there, right? That's kind of the span that we have, and ultimately we want to be able to build a stack like this. And our interest is always in problems that not only push the frontier in science, but allow us to sort of also decipher the computational needs of future in these terms, right? And that's kind of really my last slide. Questions, if any?
Thank you, Bharat. Questions? No questions from our end, Bharat. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Shravan.
So the last talk of the day is Dr. Rajgopal Srinivasan. Are you online or are you here physically?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, all right. Yes. Once Bharat stops sharing, you can immediately share.
I'm trying to figure out how to unshare. Oh, yeah.
Can someone confirm that they can see my screen?
Yep, we can see it here.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for this opportunity to present in front of such a very distinguished audience. So based on the questions that I heard in at the end of the earlier talk, I thought I would take a couple of minutes before getting into my presentation itself about some of the kinds of things that TCS does in terms of collaboration. See, my talk was primarily aimed at giving you an overview of the life sciences research at TCS, but I'm going to kind of deviate from that and give you a couple of minutes on what we do in terms of collaboration. So we have a very formal collaboration program called COIN, which is a co-innovation network, where we work with both industry and academic partners in a collaborative mode. And a specialization of the COIN program itself is the academic COIN. And so our collaborations with universities and academia in general really spans many different orders of magnitude. So at the very lowest levels, there are a lot of stuff that we do in terms of funding PhD fellowships and so on. All of the usual things like hiring of interns and postdocs, and so on. That is also something that we do on a very regular basis. At the next level, we have person-to-person collaborative projects where two people, one of the PIs from TCS and one of the PIs from a university, happen to have a common interest in working together, and they might just work together and publish. And so there, it's really about just providing the kind of specific expertise that complements each other, and they kind of work together to do useful things. This can be a little bit more formalized, where we actually fund research. We typically don't do what is called a sponsored research, where we just give a grant to a academic institution or someone to solve a problem. We stay engaged in it right through. So there is this PI to PI collaborations that we do, where there are specific problems that are of mutual interest, and we work on them. This can include funding in terms of whatever, for incidentals, for travel, for hiring of people and postdocs and so on, as well as people from TCS working on these projects. In all these cases, we expect that there'll be a very close-knit working relationship between the two groups. This can go a little bit further, where we actually do, excuse me, institute to institute collaborations. And I believe that was one of the questions that came up. And so we have a number of examples of that, where we have, for example, such arrangements with the Indian Institute of Science. We have it with several of the IITs, where there is an institute level agreement between TCS and the institute, and there is a certain amount of funding money set aside every year. And people from TCS and from the university or institute write projects, joint projects, and these are then evaluated and they get funded and so on. So there is really a broad canvas of engagement possibilities in terms of collaborations between TCS and academic institutions. So I just wanted to give that short intro before I went ahead with the rest of my talk. I'll be happy to take any questions later on. I'll also keep this talk very brief. At TCS, we have about a dozen different research programs or research areas. Many of the traditional things that you would think of in terms of computing companies, so cyber security, foundations of computing, software systems, and so on. But we also have, excuse me, we also have research programs in the physical sciences and the life sciences, behavioral sciences, and so on. In the physical sciences, for example, we are looking at novel materials and so on. In the life sciences, we are looking at many different areas. And so this chart that I have is supposed to be illustrative of that. We work on a number of areas, starting from analyzing biological sequences all the way to drug design, and everything in between. And as we go through the presentation, I'll kind of illustrate the various areas we work in. Not all of these areas require or use deep learning and machine learning, but increasingly, almost all of them are using deep learning and machine learning. So one of the areas that we work in genomics is in both foundational as well as applied. So, for example, we work on building pan genomes, which is not just a single reference genome, but actually a collection of genomes analyzed as a graph. And then how do you do alignment of short or long DNA sequences onto these graphs? This is a problem that comes straight from computer science. And so these are some of the problems that we are interested in. But we are also interested in the application of these kinds of technologies to real life situations. So we work with clinicians, and this is an example of our work with the University of California, Berkeley, and UC San Francisco Medical School, where we have used these kinds of technologies to identify mutations that lead to disease. So for diagnostic purposes, taking that one step further, we have also looked at can you use genome information by itself to predict any diseases that a newborn might have. And in all of these, algorithm development and computing, and increasingly more machine learning and deep learning play an important part, right? Because you're trying to establish whether a particular variation or mutation is going to be disease causing. On the other side, we also work very closely here in India with the Tata Medical Center at Calcutta, where we have set up a translational cancer research center, where we are looking at many different problems, primarily from an Indian context, Indian point of view. How do we get better care for patients in India when it comes to various cancers? Are there India-specific genotypes or mutations or driver mutations that lead to cancer? And also there are some neglected cancers or infrequent cancers worldwide, but are kind of more prevalent here. So things like gallbladder cancer. So for that, can we actually build organoid models? So grow gallbladder cancer organoids in the lab. How do we establish that these gallbladder cancer organoids are actually reflective of the actual cancer in the patient? So how do we grow these organoids from the patient tissue? How do we establish that they are in fact replicating what is happening in the patient? And then how can we then go ahead and try a different set of cocktail of drugs against this to get the appropriate care for the patient? So there are a number of these kinds of problems that we are involved in. All of these involve analyzing large volumes of genomics data, both expression as well as sequence data, and also more recently bit of proteomics data also. And so bringing all of this data together and doing the analysis requires new types of computational approaches and algorithms. Yeah. A third area of research focuses in the whole area of the microbiome. And so in each one of these examples that I'm illustrating, I'm trying to kind of point out the kinds of collaborations we do. So here is an example of looking at transethnic prevalence and signatures for type 2 diabetes. This is done in collaboration with the Mohns Research Institute in Chennai and also with the Novo Nordisk Foundation in Denmark, where we had Indian cohorts and Danish cohorts, and looking at the microbiome in pre-diabetic, non-diabetic, and diabetic patients, and trying to classify and those samples and find signatures for the either the emergence or the lack thereof of diabetes in these patients. Another area of interest for us is in the whole area of systems and network biology. Again, these are all projects that we do collaboratively. For example, the tuberculosis project, looking at the host-guest interactions and trying to understand the underlying biology and uncover new biology, was a project done with several different Indian institutions, all of whom were funded by funding institutes in India, but we don't get funding from them. We contribute time and resources to execute those projects. Similarly, we work with, for example, the Mount Sinai Hospital, where we have looked at examples of disease arising from mutations in a protein called HMBS, which is involved in the porphyrin synthesis and so on. Again, this is an example of a collaboration of a researcher to researcher that just happened because two people met and thought they could work together. And finally, there is also another example of research which is kind of collaboration in the wild, if you will. And these are where there are public challenges like the DREAM challenges and so on, where we also participate. And there is an exchange of ideas that happens as a consequence of that. And each one learns from one another. But the idea in all of this is that we contribute to these projects, both in terms of time and resources. In some cases, we also contribute in terms of funding. But at the end of it all, the outcomes are publications in various fora. I heard quite a bit of discussion on protein structures and RNA structures and AlphaFold and so on earlier in the day. So that is again another area of research that we engage in, again in collaboration, looking at the dynamics of proteins and how we may use molecular dynamic simulations to explain various catalytic phenomena that happen in proteins. And here you want to use a mix of straight conventional molecular dynamics, and also some aspects of it you might want to use quantum chemistry concepts. So there's a mixed mode hybrid kind of molecular dynamic simulations that we do. And finally, the most extensive use of deep learning in our group has been in this whole area of drug design. And so we have now several publications in this area of using deep learning for de novo drug design, for doing multi-parameter optimization, and also kind of understanding what the models are actually picking up as important. And we want to get to a stage where we have these explainable models. And so the explainable models are at the level where we are able to tell a medicinal chemist or a bench chemist, here are the certain groups that are contributing to your activity, or here are certain groups that are leading to toxicity, and so on. And so these are some of the things that we are doing in terms of interpretable machine learning models in the last 1 year or so. And finally, the thing that I haven't mentioned is we are applying many of the same concepts to design of proteins and RNA, about which also I heard earlier this morning. So with that, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions now or later.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Srinivasan. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Yogesh here, may I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I just wanted to, it's actually a comment. We've, for the square kilometer array project, we have worked quite extensively with TCS in its TRDDC avatar.
Yes.
We had Dr. Swaminathan and Dr. Shubhro Rai Chowdhury work with us over a period of several years between 2011 and 2014, working on the concept design for the square kilometer array telescope. So the work with NCRA and therefore TIFR goes back in the astronomy domain as well, many years.
Absolutely, and I'm aware of that. Swaminathan is a good friend of mine. Yes, and
Yeah.
we've discussed it at several times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Koti from TIFR. So I have a question regarding protein design. So are you interested in, for example, like we work a lot experimentally on making proteins which are mechanically robust, like I spoke in the morning. So I'm trying to, this is a very, narrow, most people are typically not much interested because it's not really wide range problem. So I'm trying to see that whether deep learning or AI methods, which might definitely have impact because so then we do not have to really, screen more proteins, so then that basically gives us a smaller set of proteins.
Absolutely. So the person from our group who leads that, Dr. Sadhana, is actually attending this meeting. And immediately after your talk, she also messaged me saying, this sounds interesting. We should talk further about this. And so, yeah, I think there is quite a good case for us to talk about this in detail, because one of the big issues is how do mutations affect stability function of protein, and that is a question that we are very interested in. And there are numerous approaches one can take towards that. And there are also current approaches which rely on lots of databases of existing measurements. And not all of that data might be actually appropriate for building some of these models, because some proteins are two-state folders, most of them in those databases. But I'm given to understand there are a lot of interesting proteins are actually not two-state proteins. And so those kinds of things might require a different data set on which to actually build models. And so to the extent that you are generating such data and we have an interest and experience in analyzing such data, this is well worth talking more about.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess that's it. Shall we take a 5-minute break and then we come back to have a little discussion to see how we proceed ahead? Is that reasonable? Okay, so let me see if I can get some, rustle up some tea for everyone. But yeah, so we'll be back in, it's 3:40 now, let's say 3:50, we're back at 3:50.
Pull them and measure the force as a function of
He's a guy actually. He's a guy.
there people online still?
Okay, not everyone's back, but I'm just going to begin for a few minutes. And there's some people also on Zoom. So we can just, so now is the time to pin the industry guys down and pin our own faculty.